Welcome back to Educator.com's English Grammar course. This lesson is on conditional tenses and the subjunctive mood. Let's get started. All right, we're going to cover two major categories in this lesson. We're going to talk about conditional tenses. We're going to talk about how to form them and how to use them. And then we're going to talk about the subjunctive mood, which is one of the trickiest areas in English grammar. And we're going to talk about how to form that and how to use that. All right, what are conditional tenses? Conditional tenses are used in English to express what we would do or what would happen given certain conditions. If the stars align and this happens, then this event will follow. Conditional statements always have two parts: a subordinating if clause, the condition, and an independent then clause, the result. If you have this condition, then you have this result. You're using a conditional statement and you're using a conditional tense. Verb forms in conditional tenses vary according to the kind of conditional statement being made. We use verbs to indicate exactly how likely this is and how it relates to time. All right. If your statement states a conditional fact, if this happens, then that happens, you use the simple present in the if clause and the simple present in the then clause. When the car hits 65 miles per hour, it starts to shimmy. Every time it hits 65, it starts to shimmy. Conditional fact. If you think you can succeed, you try harder. Given this condition, you will have this result. Conditional fact. Now, if your statement makes a prediction, use the simple present in the if clause and will, can, may, should, or might with the base form of the verb in the then clause. If you add more flour to the sauce, it should thicken nicely. We're making a prediction. You add more flour, then it should thicken up. If she drives any faster, she will drive off the road. Again, making a prediction. You don't know for certain it's going to happen, but it's probable. Now, if your sentence speculates about something that is unlikely to happen, use the past tense in the if clause and could, might, or would with the base form of the verb in the then clause. The classic example of this is, if I had $1 million. If I had $1 million, I would quit my job. Now, it's unlikely that I'm going to get $1 million, so I say I would. If you thought more about the feelings of others, you might have more friends. Now, if you thought more about the feelings of others and you happen to be a hermit living on a desert island, it's still pretty unlikely you're going to make more friends. Now, the interesting thing about this is, because you're using this particular form of the conditional tense, you're implying that the person you're speaking to doesn't really think very much about the feelings of others and isn't likely to start. So you're conveying extra information by using this particular conditional tense. All right, if your sentence speculates about something that didn't happen in the past, you use the past perfect in the if clause and could have, might have, or would have in the past with the past participle form. Remember, that's usually the ed form, or the one you use for the simple past tense, of the main verb in the then clause. If I had won $1 million at some point in the past, I would have quit my job shortly thereafter. If you had thought more about the feelings of others back before you were a hermit living on a desert island, you might have had more friends in school. Again, this implies that the person you're speaking to is no longer in school, so if you had thought, then you might have had. Speculating about the past. Coulda, shoulda, woulda. Now, if your sentence speculates about something that's contrary to fact, okay, we're talking here about wishes, about requests, about hypothetical situations, then you use were, which is the subjunctive that we'll get to in a moment, in the if clause, and could, might, or would with the base form of the main verb in the then clause. So this is a famous exchange between Lady Nancy Astor and Winston Churchill, famously acid. If I were your wife, I would poison your tea. Nice thing to say to someone at dinner. To which Churchill replied, if I were your husband, I might drink it. So again, we're talking about something contrary to fact. They were both married to other people. There's no way that they're going to end up married, at least anytime soon, to each other. So if I were your wife, subjunctive, I would poison your tea, and if I were your husband, I might drink it. Now, what is the subjunctive mood? Moods are a little bit different from tenses in English. They're used for certain kinds of statements rather than to indicate just when the actions take place. Remember, tense usually indicates time and or degree of completion. Moods have more to do with the nature of reality and how your statement relates to it. The most baffling and confusing mood is the subjunctive, which is used for statements, as we just saw, that are contrary to fact. The subjunctive mood uses the base form for all verbs in the present tense, except to be, which uses were for the subjunctive. Inevitably, the verb to be is the exception to the rules. It's the most irregular verb in the language. All right. Use the subjunctive mood to describe something that you wish for. I wish I were taller. You use it to describe something that you are requesting. My boss asked that I arrive, again, simple present tense, at the office 20 minutes early today, using the base form. He asks that I do this. You also use it to describe something contrary to fact. If only he were less vain. Again, the use of the subjective implies that he is extremely vain and we're wishing that he were otherwise, but it's highly unlikely to happen. All right, see if you can figure out which tense to use in each of these examples. Your dentist recommends that you, some form of floss, daily. When the thunder rolls, my cat, some form of hide, under the bed. If that water, some form of rise any higher, this house, some form of flood, for certain. If you use some form of stop, to think for a moment, you some form of realize how wrong you are. And all I ask is that you some form of grant me a fair hearing. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. And there you have it. Your dentist recommends that you floss daily. Now your clue here was recommends. This is somebody giving you advice, making a request. It's a bit contrary to fact, so you're using the subjunctive. You're using the base form. He recommends that you floss. When the thunder rolls, oh, there's a conditional statement. My cat hides under the bed. If that water rises any higher, present tense in the if clause, this house will flood for certain. Again, we're making a prediction. The water is rising. The house hasn't flooded yet, but if it rises, it will flood. If you stopped to think for a moment, you would realize how wrong you are. Again, you're describing something that's a bit unlikely, so you use the past tense in the if clause and would realize in the then clause. And all I ask is that you grant me a fair hearing. Again, subjunctive. All I ask. You're making a request, so you use the subjunctive mood. All right. Take a look at these and see if you can figure out the correct tense to use in the blank. If I, some form of to be, a bell, I, some form of ring, at the sight of you. If only the game, some form of end, sooner, we, some form of win. If you, some form of stir in more yeast, the dough, some form of rise. If Abraham Lincoln, some form of live, longer, he, some form of be, kinder to the south. If you, some form of be, my mother, I, some form of hate, Mother's Day. That's a cheery thought. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. And there we have it. If I were a bell. Again, we're talking about something that is contrary to fact, so we use the subjunctive. If I were a bell, I would ring. So here we have would applied to the base form of the verb ring at the sight of you. If only the game had ended sooner, we would have won. We're speculating about something that didn't happen in the past, so we use had ended and would have won. If you stir in more yeast, the dough will rise. We're making a conditional prediction. If you do this thing, which we are predicting, this result, which we are also predicting, will happen. If Abraham Lincoln had lived longer, we're speculating about something that didn't happen in the past. Your clue here was Abraham Lincoln. He's dead. He's been dead for over 100 years. We're obviously talking about something that happened in the past. He would have been kinder to the South. And finally, here's a little echo of Winston Churchill and Lady Astor. If you were my mother, I would hate Mother's Day. Remember that were in the subjunctive mood. All right? So we're talking about something contrary to fact. The person you're addressing presumably is not your mother. So if you were my mother, I would hate, there's that would again, Mother's Day. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching. Educator.com.